Hey there, welcome to another journey into the dusty corners of history. Tonight we're stepping into silk slippers and velvet robes, but don't get too comfortable because being a medieval prince wasn't exactly the fairy tale you might imagine. From dawn prayers to diplomatic dinners, from sword lessons to succession politics, royal life was a carefully choreographed dance between privilege and pressure. So settle in, maybe grab a warm drink, and let's explore what it really meant to grow up wearing a crown that might never actually fit your head. Before we dive deep into castle corridors and throne room tensions, take a moment to like this video if you enjoy these historical deep dives, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. It's always fascinating to see our community of history lovers from around the world. Now dim those lights, find your most comfortable position, and let's ease into medieval nobility together. Picture this. You wake up not to an alarm clock, but to the soft chanting of monks in the castle chapel. The stone walls around you are thick enough to muffle most sounds, but morning prayers always find their way through. Your chamber is grand by medieval standards, with tapestries depicting your family's victories hanging from the walls and a fire crackling in the hearth that servants lit hours before you stirred. But grandeur comes with a price, and that price is never truly being alone. As a prince in medieval times, your day begins the moment your eyes open, and it belongs entirely to the kingdom, not to you. A valet approaches your bed, bowing low before speaking. Today's schedule has already been planned by advisors, tutors, and courtiers who see you not as a child or young man, but as the future embodiment of royal power. Every moment is structured, every activity designed to mould you into the ruler your father expects you to become. The first lesson of princehood starts before you even leave your bedchamber. You don't dress yourself. That would be beneath your station, and more importantly, it would deny skilled servants their purpose and livelihood. Your clothing isn't just fabric, it's a statement. Each thread, each colour, each ornament sewn into your tunic sends a message about wealth, power, and divine right to rule. The process of dressing takes nearly an hour, layer upon layer of fine wool, silk imported from distant lands, and jewellery that costs more than most families see in a lifetime. Your breakfast isn't grabbed quickly before rushing out the door. It's a formal affair served on silver platters, with servants standing at attention while you eat. The food is rich, carefully prepared by cooks who understand that poisoning the prince would mean their immediate execution. But even your meals serve a political purpose. The bread comes from grain grown on royal lands, the meat from animals raised by loyal subjects, the wine from vineyards that pay taxes to your father's treasury. Every bite reminds you that you consume not just food, but the labour and loyalty of thousands of people who will never sit at a table like yours. Education begins immediately after breakfast, but forget everything you think you know about medieval learning. Your tutors aren't just scholars, they're some of the most brilliant minds in the kingdom, often educated in universities across Europe, or trained in the great monasteries where knowledge was preserved through dark centuries. You study Latin because it's the language of diplomacy, law, and the church. You learn rhetoric because words can prevent wars or start them. Mathematics isn't abstract theory, it's the foundation for understanding taxation, military logistics, and architectural projects that will define your reign. But perhaps most importantly, you study history. Not the sanitized version found in children's books, but the brutal, honest accounts of kings who succeeded and those who failed spectacularly. Your tutors don't just tell you about great victories, they dissect the political mistakes that led to civil wars, the diplomatic failures that resulted in invasions, and the personal weaknesses that destroyed entire dynasties. Every lesson carries an implicit warning. This could be your fate if you're not careful, wise, and ruthlessly competent. The morning's academic work is intense, but it's followed by something equally demanding and far more dangerous: military training. You're not learning to fight for sport or exercise. You're preparing for the very real possibility that you'll need to lead armies into battle, defend your castle against siege, or engage in single combat to defend your honour. The weapons are real. The instructors are battle-hardened veterans, and the expectations are unforgiving. Sword work begins with wooden practice blades, but you graduate quickly to steel. The weight of a real sword surprises most people. It's not the lightweight prop from movies, but a carefully balanced instrument of war that requires strength, skill, and years of practice to master. Your arms ache, your hands blister, and your muscles burn, but complaint isn't an option. Future kings don't whine about discomfort, and weakness in a prince is seen as weakness in the entire royal line. Horsemanship is equally crucial, because medieval warfare happens on horseback. You learn to control a massive destrier, a warhorse bred for size, strength and aggression. These animals can weigh over 1,000 pounds and stand nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder. Managing one while wearing heavy armour, carrying weapons and making tactical decisions requires a level of skill that takes years to develop. Falls are frequent, injuries are common, but you get back on because the alternative is being seen as unfit to rule. The political education happens throughout the day, woven into every interaction. You're present during your father's audiences with petitioners, watching how he balances justice with mercy, how he reads the motivations behind every request, and how he makes decisions that affect thousands of lives. Court politics are more complex than any game of chess, with alliances shifting based on marriages, inheritance disputes, trade agreements, and personal grudges that might stretch back generations. You learn to recognize the subtle signs of deception in a courtier's smile, the barely concealed ambition in a noble's bow, and the genuine concern in a loyal advisor's warning. Everyone wants something from you, and part of your education involves learning to identify what that something is, while revealing as little as possible about your own thoughts and plans. Trust is a luxury that princes can rarely afford completely. Diplomatic training prepares you for the international stage where one wrong word can trigger conflicts that last for decades. You study the genealogies of neighbouring royal houses, memorising claims to various thrones, understanding which marriages would strengthen alliances and which might create dangerous precedents. Languages become tools of statecraft. Speaking French might facilitate negotiations with one kingdom, while knowledge of German could prevent misunderstandings with Holy Roman Empire representatives. Religious education isn't just about personal faith, though that matters deeply in medieval society. It's about understanding the complex relationship between temporal and spiritual power. The Church owns vast lands, commands enormous wealth, and influences the daily lives of your subjects in ways that modern people can barely imagine. You need to work with bishops and abbots, understand church law, and navigate the political implications of theological disputes that might seem abstract but can tear kingdoms apart. Afternoon often brings hunting expeditions, but these aren't leisurely, recreational activities. Hunting is military training disguised as entertainment. You learn to track prey through dense forests, coordinate with groups of riders, and make quick decisions under pressure. The skills translate directly to warfare, and the physical demands keep you fit for battle. Plus, successful hunts provide food for the castle and demonstrate your competence to nobles who join these expeditions. The social aspects of hunting matter enormously. These expeditions are opportunities to build relationships with powerful nobles, assess potential allies and enemies, and show that you possess the courage, skill, and leadership qualities expected of future royalty. Every conversation during rest breaks, every demonstration of archery skill, and every tactical decision about which trails to follow is being evaluated by men who will someday need to choose whether to support your claim to the throne. Evening brings different challenges as the Great Hall fills with nobles, visiting dignitaries, merchants, and church officials. Dinner isn't just a meal, it's a carefully choreographed political performance where seating arrangements reflect current alliances, menu choices demonstrate wealth and international connections, and conversations shape policy decisions that affect the entire kingdom. You sit at the high table, visible to everyone, aware that your every gesture is being interpreted for signs of weakness, favour, or future intentions. The entertainment during these evening gatherings serves multiple purposes beyond mere amusement. Troubadours and minstrels don't just sing songs, they carry news from other kingdoms, spreading information about political developments, military movements, and social changes that might affect your realm. Their performances often contain subtle political messages, and part of your education involves learning to decode these artistic communications while contributing your own messages through the songs you request or the artists you patronize. Dance isn't recreational either. It's diplomatic protocol in motion, with complex rules about who partners with whom, when certain steps are appropriate, and how physical proximity during dancing reflects political relationships. A misstep isn't just embarrassing, it can be interpreted as a slight against another noble house, or a signal of shifting loyalties. As the evening progresses and guests retire to their chambers, you finally have moments that approach privacy. But even these quiet hours serve educational purposes. You might review the day's lessons with a trusted tutor, discuss observations about court politics with a loyal advisor, or study maps and documents related to territorial disputes that will someday become your responsibility to resolve. Sleep, when it finally comes, arrives in a chamber that's both luxurious and isolated. The heavy curtains around your bed block out light and sound, but they also create a barrier between you and the world you're being trained to rule. Tomorrow will bring another day of structured learning, political manoeuvring, and preparation for responsibilities that most people can't even imagine. This is the reality of medieval princehood. Not the romanticised version of fairy tales, but a rigorous, demanding, and often lonely preparation for absolute power over human lives. But let's step back for a moment and consider what this isolation actually means for a developing mind. You're surrounded by hundreds of people every day, yet genuine companionship remains elusive. The other children in the castle are either servants' offspring, who must treat you with formal deference, or the sons and daughters of nobles who see you primarily as a future source of favour and advancement. Authentic friendship becomes nearly impossible when every relationship carries political implications. Your siblings, if you have any, represent both your closest potential allies and your greatest existential threats. In a world where succession laws remain fluid and disputed claims can tear kingdoms apart, brothers and sisters aren't just family members. They're alternative candidates for the throne, backup plans if you prove unsuitable, or potential leaders of rebellions if they decide your rule threatens their own survival. Family dinners carry undertones that would make modern psychologists deeply concerned. The weight of expectation presses down on you constantly, but it's not just about up to standards living. It's about exceeding them while making the effort appear effortless. A prince who struggles visibly with his lessons suggests weakness. One who excels too obviously might be seen as arrogant or threatening to established nobles who prefer malleable rulers. You learn to perform competence with just enough humility to avoid appearing dangerous to your own supporters. Privacy becomes a foreign concept early in your life. Servants dress you, bathe you, and attend to your most basic needs. Guards follow you everywhere, not just for protection but to ensure you don't engage in activities deemed inappropriate for future royalty. Even your correspondence is monitored, your conversations reported, and your friendships analysed for potential security risks or political implications. The food you eat tells stories about the kingdom's health and your family's priorities. During prosperous times, your table overflows with exotic spices from distant lands, wine from the finest vineyards, and elaborate dishes that showcase the kingdom's wealth to visiting dignitaries. But during famines or economic hardships, your meals become political statements. Eating lavishly while subjects starve can spark rebellions, but appearing too austere might signal weakness to neighbouring kingdoms watching for signs of internal trouble. Your serves clothing as daily a diplomatic briefing. The colours you wear signal alliances, the fabrics demonstrate trade relationships, and the jewellery displays both wealth and the specific loyalties of craftsmen who created each piece. A ruby from one region, silk from another, and gold worked by particular artisans all send messages to observers who understand the complex language of medieval fashion politics. Religious obligations structure your days in ways that go far beyond personal spiritual development. Morning prayers aren't just about connecting with the divine, they're public demonstrations of piety that reassure subjects about your moral fitness to rule. The specific saints you honour, the donations you make to particular monasteries, and the theological positions you support all carry political weight in a world where religious and temporal power interweave constantly. Your confessions to castle chaplains walk a delicate line between spiritual honesty and political necessity. The priest who hears your sins also serves as an advisor to your father and maintains connections to the broader church hierarchy. Even your private moments with God become potential sources of intelligence that might influence policy decisions or diplomatic negotiations. The books you're permitted to read undergo careful screening, not just for appropriateness, but for political content. Classical texts might contain ideas about republicanism that could undermine divine right theories. Contemporary chronicles might describe successful rebellions in ways that seem too appealing. Even religious texts require interpretation because different theological schools support different theories about royal authority and the relationship between earthly and heavenly power. Your tutors become some of the most influential people in your life, yet their positions remain precarious. A teacher who fails to adequately prepare you faces exile, or worse, but one who succeeds too well might create a prince who questions his father's methods or seeks to implement reforms that threaten established interests. The best tutors learn to walk this narrow path, developing your intellectual capabilities while ensuring your loyalty to existing power structures. Language instruction extends far beyond vocabulary and grammar. You learn the subtle differences between formal diplomatic language that commits you to nothing, courtly expressions that flatter without promising specific favours, and the direct communication styles appropriate for military commands during battle. Each register serves specific purposes, and using the wrong tone in the wrong context can have serious consequences. Mathematics education focuses heavily on practical applications that will define your reign. You study taxation systems, not as abstract theory, but as the foundation of royal power. Understanding how much revenue different regions can provide, calculating the costs of military campaigns, and projecting the economic impact of various policies become essential skills. Numbers aren't just academic exercises, they're tools for maintaining the delicate balance between extracting enough resources to fund the kingdom and avoiding the crushing tax burdens that spark peasant revolts. Military strategy sessions involve detailed analysis of actual battlefields, siege techniques, and the logistics of moving armies across difficult terrain. You study maps until you can visualize the strategic importance of every river crossing, mountain pass, and fortified city in your realm and beyond. These aren't theoretical exercises, but preparation for real conflicts that will determine whether your kingdom expands, contracts, or simply survives. The castle's architecture itself serves as a constant reminder of your position and responsibilities. Every stone was placed with defense in mind, every corridor designed to channel potential attackers into killing zones, and every tower positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire. You learn to see your home not as a comfortable residence, but as a military installation that must be understood, maintained, and improved constantly. Servants' lives intersect with yours daily, yet the social distance remains absolute. The woman who helps dress you each morning might be roughly your age, but conversations beyond the strictly necessary remain forbidden. The stable boy who cares for your horse possesses skills you respect, but friendship would undermine the social hierarchy that keeps the kingdom functioning. You learn to appreciate competence while maintaining emotional distance from those whose lives depend entirely on your family's continued favour. Your relationship with money develops in peculiar ways. You never handle actual coins in daily transactions, yet you must understand complex economic systems that generate royal revenue. Trade agreements, currency fluctuations, and the relative values of different goods become familiar topics, but the physical reality of poverty remains largely theoretical. You know intellectually that most of your subjects live on the edge of starvation, but your direct experience of want or deprivation remains carefully limited. The concept of choice, so fundamental to modern life, operates differently in your world. Your marriage will be arranged to strengthen political alliances, your career path predetermined by birth, and your beliefs shaped by advisors who serve your father's interests. Yet within these constraints, you must develop the decision-making skills necessary to rule effectively. It's a strange paradox, learning to exercise absolute power over others while having limited control over your own life's direction. Entertainment and leisure activities that might seem purely recreational actually serve multiple educational and political functions. Music lessons teach you to appreciate the cultural achievements that legitimize royal patronage while developing skills useful for diplomatic receptions. Art instruction helps you evaluate the quality of works that will decorate your court and the competence of artists whose creations will shape your public image for generations. Physical fitness routines prepare your body not just for warfare, but for the exhausting demands of royal ceremonial duties. Standing for hours during religious services, riding for days during royal progresses through your territories, and maintaining dignified postures during lengthy diplomatic negotiations all require stamina and physical discipline that must be developed through consistent training. Even your sleep patterns reflect the unusual demands of royal life. You retire later than most of your subjects because evening hours bring the informal conversations where real political business often gets conducted. Yet you rise earlier because morning audiences with petitioners and advisors require your presence before the day's formal activities begin. Rest becomes something you fit around the kingdom's needs rather than your personal preferences. The isolation of command begins early in your education. You learn that final decisions will always be yours to make, that the consequences of those choices will affect thousands of lives, and that the emotional burden of leadership cannot be shared fully with anyone. This preparation for ultimate responsibility shapes your psychological development in ways that create both strength and profound loneliness. The seasons bring different challenges to your carefully structured existence, each one teaching lessons about adaptation and the cyclical nature of royal responsibility. Winter months trap you within castle walls, creating an intensity of court life that can feel suffocating. The Great Hall becomes the centre of political activity as nobles seek shelter from harsh weather, bringing their ambitions and grievances directly to your father's attention. You observe how confined spaces amplify every personality conflict, how limited resources test loyalties, and how the promise of spring affects everyone's behaviour and decision-making. Spring arrives with its own educational opportunities as the kingdom awakens from winter's grip. You accompany inspection tours of royal lands, observing how harsh months affected agricultural prospects, assessing damage to roads and bridges that require repair, and meeting with local administrators who've managed regional affairs during the isolated winter period. These journeys aren't pleasant rides through countryside, but intensive crash courses in practical governance and the real challenges of maintaining royal authority across vast territories. Summer brings military campaign season, when theoretical knowledge transforms into practical experience. You might accompany your father on expeditions against rebellious vassals, observe siege warfare firsthand, or participate in the complex logistics of moving thousands of men across hostile territory. The romantic notions of knightly combat quickly dissolve when you witness the brutal reality of medieval warfare, the stench of battlefield casualties and the difficult decisions required when choosing between mercy and the harsh justice that maintains royal authority. Autumn teaches lessons about harvest, taxation, and the delicate balance between royal needs and subject survival. You learn to evaluate crop yields not just as economic statistics, but as indicators of your kingdom's capacity to support military adventures, ambitious building projects, or the charitable activities that demonstrate royal benevolence. The abundance or scarcity of autumn harvests will determine policy options available throughout the coming year, making agricultural assessment a crucial royal skill. Your understanding of justice develops through direct observation of your father's court sessions. Medieval law isn't the systematic code modern people expect, but a complex blend of written statutes, traditional customs, and royal prerogative that requires constant interpretation. You watch how experienced rulers balance competing claims, navigate conflicts between different legal traditions, and use judicial decisions to reinforce political alliances or send messages to potential troublemakers. The mechanics of royal justice fascinate and horrify in equal measure. Public executions aren't just punishment, but carefully choreographed political theatre designed to demonstrate royal power while satisfying popular demands for retribution. You learn when mercy enhances royal authority and when harshness becomes necessary to prevent challenges to established order. These aren't abstract philosophical questions, but practical decisions that will define your reign's character and effectiveness. Religious festivals punctuate the year with opportunities to demonstrate piety while reinforcing social hierarchies. Your participation in major celebrations sends messages about royal priorities, theological positions, and relationships with various church factions. The specific rituals you perform, the donations you make, and the religious figures you honour all carry political weight that extends far beyond personal spiritual development. Marriage negotiations begin earlier than modern sensibilities would find appropriate, but royal matches aren't about personal compatibility. Your future spouse will be chosen to cement military alliances, resolve territorial disputes, or strengthen claims to contested regions. You study genealogical charts with the same intensity that military commanders analyse battlefield maps, because bloodlines determine inheritance rights that could justify future wars or prevent them entirely. The women considered as potential brides aren't evaluated for personality traits or shared interests, but for the political advantages their family connections might provide. A princess from a neighbouring kingdom might bring claims to valuable territory. A duke's daughter could secure loyalty support might prove from powerful vassals who's crucial during succession crises. Even the dowry negotiations involve complex calculations about immediate financial benefits versus long-term political commitments. Your own sisters, if you have any, become pawns in similar diplomatic games. You watch as their marriages get arranged to secure alliances, resolve conflicts, or establish royal influence in distant regions. Their education focuses on languages, diplomatic skills, and cultural knowledge that will help them serve as unofficial ambassadors in foreign courts. The personal cost of these arrangements remains largely unspoken, but deeply understood by everyone involved. The castle's daily rhythms teach lessons about hierarchy, efficiency, and the invisible labour that maintains royal comfort. You learn to notice which servants possess real influence despite their humble titles, how information flows through informal, more reliable networks that often prove than official reports, and why treating support staff with basic respect enhances rather than undermines royal authority. Kitchen politics provide fascinating insights into resource management, planning, and the complex social relationships that keep large households functioning. The head cook wields enormous practical power, controlling access to one of life's basic necessities, while managing subordinates whose skills and loyalty directly affect royal health and comfort. You observe how successful administrators balance competing demands, resolve personality conflicts, and maintain quality standards under constant pressure. Stable management offers similar lessons about leadership, technical expertise, and the care required to maintain valuable resources. War horses represent enormous investments that require daily attention from skilled professionals. You learn to evaluate horseflesh, understand breeding programs, and appreciate the specialized knowledge that keeps cavalry units effective. These aren't trivial concerns, but crucial elements of military preparedness that could determine your kingdom's survival. The armory becomes another classroom where theoretical knowledge meets practical application. You learn to assess weapon quality, understand the strengths and limitations of different combat styles, and appreciate the craftsmanship required to produce effective military equipment. Sword making, armor construction, and siege engine development all require technical skills that royal patrons must understand even if they don't personally possess them. Diplomatic reception protocols teach you to read cultural signals, avoid unintentional insults, and project appropriate levels of royal dignity without appearing arrogant or unapproachable. Foreign ambassadors arrive with their own traditions, expectations, and political agendas that require careful navigation. A gesture that shows respect in one culture might signal weakness in another, making cultural literacy essential for successful international relations. The art of gift-giving becomes a sophisticated form of communication where the value, appropriateness, and symbolism of presents convey complex political messages. Receiving gifts requires equal skill in interpretation, gracious acknowledgement, and understanding the obligations that valuable presents might create. Royal treasuries maintain collections of diplomatic gifts specifically chosen for their ability to flatter, impress, or subtly intimidate, depending on the recipient and circumstances. Your personal interests must be carefully cultivated to serve royal purposes while providing genuine intellectual stimulation. If you show aptitude for music, that skill becomes useful for diplomatic entertainment and cultural patronage. Mathematical ability translates into better understanding of engineering projects, taxation systems, and military logistics. Even seemingly frivolous pursuits like poetry can enhance your reputation for cultural sophistication while improving your ability to craft persuasive speeches and diplomatic correspondence. The concept of privacy evolves as you mature, becoming less about personal space and more about creating opportunities for confidential conversations that shape policy decisions. You learn to recognize when formal settings constrain honest discussion and how to create informal moments where advisors feel free to express concerns or suggestions they wouldn't voice in public settings. Physical training intensifies as you approach the age when real combat becomes possible. Weapons practice shifts from basic technique development to tactical scenarios that simulate actual battlefield conditions. You learn to fight while exhausted, make decisions under extreme stress, and maintain leadership effectiveness when personal safety becomes uncertain. These aren't games but preparation for situations where royal survival and kingdom preservation depend entirely on your individual performance. The psychology of command requires understanding how fear, loyalty, ambition, and duty motivate different personality types under various circumstances. You study your father's interactions with subordinates, noting how successful leaders adapt their communication styles to achieve specific objectives with different audiences. The same message might need to be delivered with harsh authority to one advisor while requiring gentle persuasion with another. Economic education expands beyond basic mathematics to include understanding trade relationships, currency systems, and the complex negotiations required to maintain commercial agreements that fund royal activities. Merchant relationships become crucial diplomatic tools because economic prosperity affects popular loyalty, while trade disputes can escalate into military conflicts that threaten kingdom security. Legal education focuses on practical application rather than theoretical principles, teaching you to navigate the competing claims and conflicting precedents that characterize medieval jurisprudence. Court cases often involve property disputes, inheritance questions, or criminal accusations where royal decisions will create precedents affecting future legal interpretations and political relationships. The burden of representing divine authority on earth requires theological education that goes beyond personal faith to include understanding church politics, doctrinal disputes, and the practical implications of religious policy decisions. Your relationship with local bishops, monastic communities, and religious scholars will influence everything from taxation policy to military recruitment, making religious knowledge essential for effective governance. As you approach the threshold of adulthood, the weight of future responsibility becomes more tangible and immediate. The theoretical education of childhood gradually transforms into practical preparation for real decision-making authority that will arrive sooner than anyone truly feels ready to handle. The transition from adolescence to young adulthood brings a shift in how others perceive and interact with you. Courtiers who once spoke to you with the patronizing tone reserved for children now address you with careful formality, recognizing that your opinions might soon carry the weight of royal decree. This change creates both excitement and unease, as you realize that casual comments made during conversations could be interpreted as policy statements or hints about future royal intentions. Your father begins including you in private council meetings where the real business of governance takes place, away from the formal ceremonies and public audiences. These sessions reveal the gap between the idealized version of kingship presented in your education and the messy realities of actual rule. You witness heated arguments between advisors, learn about corruption among local officials, and discover how many royal decisions involve choosing between competing bad options rather than selecting obvious good ones. The maps in the council chamber become intensely personal as you study territorial boundaries that you might someday need to defend or expand. Rivers that seemed like mere geographical features in your lessons now represent strategic choke points that could determine military campaign outcomes. Mountain passes transform from interesting topographical details into crucial considerations for trade routes and invasion defences. Every landmark carries potential implications for royal policy and kingdom survival. Intelligence networks reveal themselves as essential tools of royal authority that operate largely invisible to subjects who imagine their king simply makes wise decisions through divine inspiration. You learn about the extensive spy systems that monitor noble activities, track foreign diplomatic movements, and assess popular sentiment in distant provinces. The romantic notion of ruling through pure moral authority gives way to understanding how information, manipulation, and calculated deception support the more noble aspects of royal leadership. Succession planning discussions begin in earnest, though these conversations carry undertones of mortality that make everyone uncomfortable. Your father must balance preparing you for immediate responsibility against maintaining his own authority and avoiding the appearance of weakness that might encourage ambitious nobles to precipitate a transition they could exploit. These talks require delicate navigation between honesty about royal challenges and confidence about your readiness to handle them. The prospect of your own eventual marriage takes on new urgency as diplomatic opportunities and threats shift with changing international circumstances. Potential matches that seem distant possibilities during childhood now require serious evaluation as your father's advisors assess which alliances might prove most valuable in the coming decades. You find yourself studying portraits of foreign princesses, not as curiosities, but as potential partners whose family connections could reshape your kingdom's strategic position. Military responsibilities expand beyond training exercises to include actual command decisions during smaller conflicts that test your judgment without risking major disasters. You might lead cavalry charges against Bani siege operations, against rebel-dit groups, Overseas castles, or coordinate with allied forces during border skirmishes. These experiences provide invaluable lessons about the gap between theoretical military knowledge and the chaotic realities of actual combat situations. The economics of warfare become painfully clear as you witness the enormous costs associated with maintaining professional armies, purchasing military equipment, and supporting the complex logistics required for extended campaigns. A single siege might consume more resources than several villages produce in an entire year, making military action expensive political decisions rather than simple responses to threats or opportunities. Diplomatic correspondence requires your personal attention as foreign courts begin addressing communications directly to you rather than routing everything through your father's chancellery. These letters demand careful analysis, not just for their explicit content but for subtle signals about changing international relationships, potential alliance opportunities, and emerging threats that might not be immediately obvious from surface reading. Religious obligations intensify as church leaders begin treating you as an independent political actor whose theological positions and institutional relationships will shape future church-state interactions. Your donations to specific monastic orders, attendance at particular religious ceremonies, and support for certain theological scholars all send messages about priorities and beliefs that will influence ecclesiastical policy once you assume full royal authority. The castle's defensive preparations take on new significance as you learn to evaluate structural weaknesses, assess garrison requirements, and understand the logistical challenges involved in withstanding extended sieges. These aren't abstract military exercises, but practical preparations for scenarios where your family's survival might depend on the castle's ability to resist enemy forces until relief arrives or political circumstances change. Judicial responsibilities expand to include presiding over important court cases where your decisions will establish precedents affecting future legal interpretations and social relationships. The weight of determining guilt or innocence, imposing sentences that might include execution, and balancing competing claims for justice becomes intensely personal when real lives hang in the balance of your judgment. Trade negotiations require your direct involvement as merchant representatives and foreign commercial delegations seek agreements that will influence your kingdom's economic prosperity for years to come. Understanding commodity markets, currency exchange rates, and the political implications of various commercial arrangements becomes essential for maintaining the financial resources necessary to fund royal activities and military preparedness. Cultural patronage decisions affect your reputation among educated elites whose support provides intellectual legitimacy for royal authority. Your choices about which artists to sponsor, what architectural projects to fund, and which scholars to support at court create lasting monuments to your reign while influencing how future generations will remember your accomplishments and priorities. The informal networks that really determine how policies get implemented begin accepting you as a legitimate participant rather than merely tolerating your presence out of respect for your father. Regional administrators, military commanders, and influential nobles start bringing their concerns and suggestions directly to you, recognizing that your opinions might soon translate into official royal policy. Personal relationships become increasingly complicated as genuine friendship remains nearly impossible, while political alliances require constant attention and maintenance. Every social interaction carries potential implications for future governance, making spontaneous conversations, rare and authentic emotional connections extremely difficult to develop or maintain. The burden of secrets weighs heavily as you learn about intelligence operations, diplomatic deceptions, and internal security measures that cannot be shared even with trusted friends or family members. Royal authority depends partly on subjects believing their king possesses wisdom and moral clarity that might be compromised by knowledge of the morally ambiguous decisions required for effective governance. Physical security concerns escalate as your political importance increases and potential enemies recognize that eliminating you might be easier than defeating your father in direct confrontation. Food tasters, bodyguards, and elaborate security protocols become constant reminders that royal blood makes you a target for ambitious rivals, foreign agents, and domestic malcontents. The psychological pressure of representing divine authority while remaining fundamentally human creates internal conflicts that have no easy resolution. Subjects expect their future king to embody moral perfection and supernatural wisdom, while advisors demand pragmatic flexibility and willingness to make harsh decisions that contradict idealistic principles. Sleep becomes increasingly elusive as the weight of future responsibility creates anxiety about your readiness to handle the enormous challenges awaiting your eventual accession to full royal power. The comfortable routines of childhood give way to restless nights spent contemplating scenarios where wrong decisions could result in military defeat, economic collapse, or civil war. The castle's evening activities shift from educational entertainment to practical political networking, as important conversations happen during seemingly casual social interactions. You learn to navigate these gatherings with constant awareness that every comment might be repeated, every gesture interpreted, and every alliance noted by observers who report back to various interested parties. Your relationship with common subjects evolves from distant benevolence to complex understanding of the reciprocal obligations that bind rulers, and ruled in relationships based on mutual dependence rather than simple hierarchy. The theoretical concept of divine right gives way to practical recognition that royal authority requires popular acceptance and active cooperation from millions of individuals whose daily choices determine kingdom prosperity and stability. The gradual assumption of real responsibility creates both excitement about finally exercising meaningful authority and terror about the consequences of inevitable mistakes that will affect countless lives. The protected environment of royal education cannot fully prepare anyone for the lonely burden of making decisions where every option involves significant risks and uncertain outcomes. As you stand on the threshold between preparation and actual rule, the weight of history presses down with increasing intensity. Every lesson learned, every skill developed, and every relationship cultivated will soon be tested against challenges that cannot be anticipated or fully prepared for in advance. The fairy tale of royal privilege reveals itself as preparation for a role that demands everything, while offering no guarantee of success or even survival. The transformation from prince to potential king accelerates as external events create situations requiring immediate royal attention rather than gradual educational development. Wars don't wait for convenient timing. Diplomatic crises ignore academic schedules, and internal rebellions care nothing about your personal readiness to handle complex political challenges. Yet within this mounting pressure lies the strange satisfaction of finally approaching the purpose for which your entire life has been structured. The isolation, discipline, and sacrifice that defined your childhood begin making sense as preparation for responsibilities that will define not just your own fate, but the destiny of everyone within your future kingdom's borders. The crown that once seemed impossibly heavy during ceremonial occasions now feels like the natural culmination of decades spent preparing for this moment. Whether you're truly ready remains an open question that only actual experience will answer, but the time for preparation draws rapidly to a close as the real test of royal leadership approaches. The reality of transitioning from theoretical knowledge to practical authority creates a peculiar form of existential vertigo. You find yourself caught between the protective bubble of royal education and the unforgiving demands of actual leadership, where textbook scenarios never quite match the messy complexities of real political situations. The gap between what you've studied and what you're experiencing becomes a constant source of both humility and determination. Your advisors begin testing your judgment through carefully orchestrated situations that seem spontaneous, but are actually elaborate examinations of your decision-making capabilities. A dispute between two minor nobles might be presented as requiring immediate royal intervention, when in reality the conflict was deliberately allowed to escalate to provide you with a controlled environment for practicing diplomatic mediation. These exercises feel authentic in the moment, but their artificial nature becomes apparent only after you've committed to specific courses of action. The castle's atmosphere subtly shifts as servants, guards, and minor officials begin treating you with the deference reserved for actual authority rather than inherited potential. Conversations halt when you enter rooms, not from fear, but from recognition that your presence now carries weight beyond your father's reflected power. This change creates an odd loneliness, as spontaneous interactions become increasingly rare, and formal protocols dominate even casual encounters. Your correspondence grows exponentially as regional administrators begin seeking your opinion on matters previously handled entirely through your father's chancellery. These letters require careful consideration because your responses will be preserved, analysed, and potentially used to evaluate your competence long after the immediate issues have been resolved. Every written word becomes a permanent record of your judgment, creating pressure to craft responses that demonstrate wisdom while avoiding commitments you might later regret. The morning routine that once felt rigidly structured now provides welcome stability as the day's unpredictable challenges make familiar rituals increasingly precious. The simple act of dressing becomes a moment of calm before plunging into situations where every decision might have consequences extending far beyond the immediate circumstances. Your chamber remains the only space where you can briefly drop the performance of royal competence and acknowledge private doubts about your readiness. Military exercises evolve into operational planning sessions where theoretical knowledge must translate into practical strategies for defending actual territory against real enemies. Maps cease being academic tools and become urgent references for understanding how geographical features will influence troop movements, supply lines, and defensive positions during conflicts that seem increasingly inevitable rather than merely possible. Intelligence reports arrive with disturbing frequency, detailing threats that your education mentioned only in abstract terms. Foreign armies massing near borders, ambitious nobles cultivating suspicious alliances, and popular discontent in regions where economic hardships create fertile ground for rebellion, all transform from historical examples into immediate concerns requiring your personal attention and decisive action. The weight of secrecy becomes more oppressive as you gain access to information that cannot be shared with anyone outside the innermost circle of royal advisors. Knowledge of planned military operations, diplomatic deceptions, and domestic surveillance activities creates an isolation that extends beyond physical separation from ordinary social relationships into psychological realms, where trust becomes a luxury you can rarely afford completely. Your relationship with your father undergoes a subtle but profound transformation as he begins treating you less as a student and more as a junior partner in the complex business of governance. Private conversations shift from instructional lectures to collaborative discussions about policy options, strategic priorities, and the difficult compromises required to maintain royal authority in an increasingly complex political environment. The prospect of your own eventual reign becomes less abstract as current events create scenarios where succession might occur sooner than anyone originally anticipated. Military campaigns carry risks that could result in your father's death or incapacitation. Diplomatic missions might separate him from the kingdom for extended periods, and health concerns that royal physicians discuss in carefully euphemistic language all contribute to a growing awareness that preparation time may be running shorter than expected. Religious responsibilities expand beyond ceremonial obligations to include active participation in church politics that directly affect royal authority and kingdom stability. Your theological positions influence ecclesiastical appointments. Your donations to specific religious orders send signals about policy priorities, and your relationships with influential clergy members create networks of support or opposition that will significantly impact your future effectiveness as ruler. Economic pressures intensify as you witness firsthand the enormous costs associated with maintaining royal authority in an era of constant military threats and diplomatic challenges. The gap between royal expenses and available revenue creates difficult choices about taxation levels, military expenditures, and infrastructure investments that will define your kingdom's prosperity and your subjects' loyalty for decades to come. Legal disputes requiring your judgments become more complex and politically sensitive as various parties recognize that your decisions will establish precedents affecting future interpretations of royal authority, noble privileges, and common law traditions. The weight of determining justice in cases where competing claims all have legitimate foundations forces you to grapple with the practical limitations of theoretical legal principles. Marriage negotiations accelerate as changing international circumstances create new opportunities and threats that require immediate diplomatic responses. Potential matches that seemed like distant possibilities during your education now demand urgent evaluation as your father's advisors assess which alliances might prove most valuable in addressing current crises and future challenges. The castle's defensive preparations take on new urgency, as intelligence reports suggest that peaceful transitions of power can no longer be taken for granted. Structural improvements, garrison reinforcements, and supply stockpiling all become immediate priorities rather than long-term planning considerations, transforming your ancestral home into an actively prepared military installation. Cultural activities that once provided educational entertainment now serve primarily as political tools for demonstrating royal stability and continuity to both domestic subjects and foreign observers. Festivals, tournaments, and artistic patronage become carefully choreographed displays designed to project confidence and normalcy despite underlying tensions that threaten kingdom security. Personal interests that survived the rigorous demands of royal education must now be either abandoned or transformed into politically useful skills as time becomes an increasingly scarce resource allocated entirely according to kingdom priorities rather than individual preferences. Leisure ceases to exist in any meaningful sense, as every activity must justify itself through contribution to royal effectiveness. The informal networks that really determine policy implementation begin treating you as an equal participant rather than a privileged observer, bringing both opportunities to influence events and responsibilities for outcomes that extend far beyond your direct control. Regional power brokers, military commanders, and influential merchants start calculating how their long-term interests align with your emerging political positions. Physical security concerns escalate dramatically as your increased political importance makes you a more attractive target for enemies seeking to destabilize the kingdom through elimination of its future leadership. Bodyguards, food tasters, and elaborate protection protocols become constant reminders that royal blood creates vulnerabilities as well as privileges. Sleep patterns deteriorate as the pressure of impending responsibility creates anxiety that resists the comfortable routines that once provided reliable rest. Nights become periods for reviewing decisions, analysing intelligence reports, and contemplating scenarios where wrong choices could result in military disasters, economic collapse, or civil conflicts that tear the kingdom apart. The gradual assumption of real authority creates a strange combination of exhilaration and terror as theoretical preparation gives way to actual decision-making power over matters that affect thousands of lives. Every beyond personal success choice now carries consequences that extend your failure into realms where mistakes might be measured in terms of battlefield casualties, economic suffering, or political chaos. Your understanding of royal isolation deepens as the burden of leadership creates emotional distances that cannot be bridged through conventional human relationships. The knowledge that your decisions will determine other people's fates makes authentic connections nearly impossible, while the need for political calculation permeates even seemingly innocent social interactions. The castle's evening gatherings transform from educational opportunities into intensive political networking sessions where every conversation carries potential implications for future policy decisions and alliance formations. Social skills become diplomatic tools as you learn to navigate complex personality dynamics while advancing royal interests through apparently casual interactions. The approaching transition from preparation to actual rule creates mounting pressure to demonstrate readiness for responsibilities that no amount of education can fully prepare anyone to handle. The gap between theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom becomes increasingly apparent as real situations demand decisions based on incomplete information and conflicting advice from trusted advisors. The weight of history presses down with increasing intensity as you recognize that your choices will not only determine your own fate, but will influence the kingdom's trajectory for generations to come. The legacy of previous rulers provides both inspiration and warning about the consequences of royal decisions that seemed reasonable at the time, but created lasting problems for their successors. The fairy tale notion of royal privilege continues its steady dissolution as the reality of leadership reveals itself as an enormous burden that offers few personal rewards while demanding constant sacrifice of individual desires in service of kingdom welfare. The crown that once symbolized ultimate freedom now represents the heaviest chains imaginable, binding you to obligations that will define every aspect of your existence. The transformation from prince to potential king reaches its inevitable conclusion as external events create situations requiring immediate royal leadership rather than continued preparation. Whether you're truly ready becomes a question that only actual experience can answer, but the time for doubt has passed as the kingdom's needs demand decisive action from its future ruler. The comfortable certainties of royal education give way to the ambiguous challenges of practical governance, where success depends less on memorized knowledge than on wisdom gained through difficult experience and the ability to make sound decisions under impossible pressure. The real test of royal character begins not in classrooms or training grounds, but in the unforgiving arena of actual political leadership. As you stand at the threshold between preparation and responsibility, the weight of countless subjects' lives and hopes rests upon shoulders that must bear burdens no education could fully prepare you to carry. The crown awaits, heavy with the accumulated expectations of generations, ready to transform a carefully educated prince into a king whose choices will echo through history long after his reign has ended. The moment approaches when theory must yield to practice, when preparation must give way to performance, and when the protected world of royal education must be abandoned for the harsh realities of actual rule. The fairy tale ends here, where the real story of kingship begins with all its terrible beauty and beautiful terror. Your first real test of independent judgment arrives unexpectedly when a messenger bursts into the great hall during evening feast, bearing news that will define your readiness more than years of careful preparation ever could. A border lord has declared rebellion, citing grievances against your father's taxation policies and claiming legitimate succession rights through a distant bloodline connection. The timing isn't coincidental, arriving when your father is confined to bed with illness that palace physicians treat with careful optimism while privately expressing grave concerns about his recovery timeline. The assembled nobles turn expectantly toward the high table, but your father's chair remains conspicuously empty as the fever that began as minor discomfort has developed into something more serious. Eyes shift to you with expressions ranging from curiosity to calculation, as everyone present recognizes that your response to this crisis will signal whether you possess the decisive leadership qualities necessary for effective rule, or if you'll crumble under pressure when real authority becomes unavoidable. Your advisors exchange meaningful glances while maintaining carefully neutral expressions that reveal nothing about their private assessments of your readiness. The head of your father's council steps forward, ostensibly to brief you on the situation's complexities, but really to observe how you process urgent information under pressure, and whether your education has prepared you to distinguish between essential details and irrelevant complications that might cloud crucial decision-making moments. The rebellion isn't particularly large or well-organized, but its symbolic significance extends far beyond the immediate military threat. Other potential troublemakers throughout the kingdom are watching to see whether royal authority can respond decisively to challenges, or if hesitation and uncertainty will invite further defiance from ambitious nobles who smell weakness in the royal bloodline. Your reaction to this crisis will either reinforce established power structures or signal that the kingdom might be entering a period of instability that opportunistic enemies could exploit. Military commanders present themselves for immediate consultation, but their deferential manner cannot quite disguise the evaluative nature of their attention. These are seasoned professionals who've served your father faithfully for decades, yet they need reassurance that his heir possesses the strategic thinking and decisive temperament necessary to lead armies effectively during actual combat operations rather than training exercises where mistakes carry no lasting consequences. The logistics of mounting a military response reveal complexities that classroom discussions never adequately conveyed. Assembling sufficient forces requires calling up feudal levies from nobles whose loyalty might be questionable. Coordinating supply lines across terrain that winter weather has made treacherous, and calculating costs that will strain royal finances already stretched by recent diplomatic expenses and infrastructure investments that seemed prudent during peaceful times but now compete with immediate security needs. Intelligence reports provide conflicting assessments about the rebellion's true strength and potential for expansion, forcing you to make strategic decisions based on incomplete information, while recognizing that both overreaction and insufficient response carry serious risks. Deploying too many forces might suggest panic, while leaving other regions vulnerable, but inadequate military commitment could encourage the rebellion to grow into a genuine threat, requiring far more expensive suppression efforts. Your father's illness adds urgency to every decision, as palace physicians provide carefully worded updates that suggest his condition remains serious despite their professional optimism. The possibility that you might need to assume full royal authority immediately, rather than gradually, creates pressure to demonstrate competence quickly, while avoiding the appearance of eagerness that might seem disrespectful or politically opportunistic during his medical crisis. Religious advisors seek private audiences to discuss the theological implications of rebellion against divinely appointed authority, but their concerns extend beyond spiritual matters to practical questions about ecclesiastical support during potential military campaigns, and the Church's role in legitimizing your authority if succession occurs sooner than originally anticipated. Their careful words reveal awareness that religious backing could prove crucial during any transition period that creates opportunities for ambitious rivals. Economic considerations complicate military planning as Treasury officials present sobering calculations about campaign costs, taxation capacity, and the trade disruptions that prolonged conflict might cause throughout the kingdom. The romantic notion of royal warfare gives way to harsh arithmetic about resource allocation, debt management, and the delicate balance between funding adequate defence and avoiding fiscal policies that provoke popular unrest among subjects already burdened by existing obligations. Diplomatic correspondence arrives from neighbouring kingdoms whose rulers express carefully worded concern about regional stability, while subtly probing for information about your father's health and your own readiness to assume full royal responsibilities. These letters require responses that project confidence without revealing weakness, demonstrate competence without appearing arrogant, and maintain alliance relationships while avoiding commitments that might limit future policy flexibility. The castle's defensive preparations accelerate as military engineers assess structural weaknesses and recommend improvements that would require time and resources not immediately available during current crisis conditions. The sobering realization that your ancestral home might need to withstand actual siege warfare transforms familiar corridors and chambers into tactical considerations where every architectural feature must be evaluated for its defensive utility rather than comfort or aesthetic appeal. Your personal guard receives reinforcement as security advisors express heightened concerns about assassination attempts during periods of political instability, when eliminating potential royal successors might seem like attractive options for enemies seeking to maximize chaos and confusion. The increased protection creates additional barriers between you and normal human interaction, intensifying the isolation that accompanies growing political responsibility. Marriage negotiations that seemed like distant future considerations suddenly acquire urgent importance as diplomatic advantages or disadvantages associated with various potential matches could significantly influence current crisis outcomes. Foreign princesses who are merely names on genealogical charts now represent possible alliance opportunities that might provide military support, economic assistance, or political legitimacy during challenging transition periods. Sleep becomes increasingly elusive as the weight of impending decisions creates anxiety that resists even the most comfortable bedchamber arrangements. Nights transform into periods for reviewing intelligence reports, analysing military options, and contemplating scenarios where wrong choices could result in defeat, exile, or death, not just for yourself but for family members, loyal supporters, and innocent subjects whose lives depend entirely on royal leadership competence. The rebellion's demands arrive through official channels that require careful analysis for both explicit content and subtle implications about enemy strength, popular support, and potential negotiation opportunities. The document's formal language cannot disguise underlying threats, but responding appropriately requires balancing firmness with flexibility, while avoiding either weakness that invites escalation or harshness that eliminates peaceful resolution possibilities entirely. Council meetings become intensive strategy sessions where theoretical knowledge must translate into practical policy decisions affecting thousands of lives and enormous resource commitments that will influence kingdom stability for years, regardless of immediate crisis outcomes. The gap between academic preparation and real leadership responsibility becomes painfully apparent as complex situations resist textbook solutions and demand wisdom that only experience can provide. Your father's advisors begin treating you with subtle but unmistakable shifts in tone and manner that signal recognition of your emerging authority while maintaining appropriate respect for established hierarchy during his continued illness. These experienced professionals must balance loyalty to their longtime ruler with practical acknowledgement that future effectiveness requires building working relationships with his likely successor. Regional administrators send urgent reports about local conditions that might influence rebellion support, military recruitment potential, and popular sentiment regarding royal authority during times of uncertainty. Their correspondence reveals how effectively central government policies have been implemented in distant territories, while highlighting weaknesses in administrative systems that ambitious enemies might exploit during extended conflicts. The Great Hall's evening gatherings take on new intensity as nobles, merchants, and church officials seek opportunities to demonstrate loyalty while positioning themselves advantageously for whatever political changes might emerge from current crises. Conversations become intricate dances of alliance building and information gathering, where every participant calculates how their long-term interests align with various possible outcomes. Military preparations reveal the enormous complexity involved in transforming peaceful subjects into effective combat forces capable of suppressing organized rebellion while maintaining discipline and morale during potentially extended campaign operations. Training programs must be accelerated, equipment distributed, and supply systems organized under time pressure that allows little margin for the careful planning that ensures operational success. Intelligence networks provide increasingly detailed reports about enemy activities, ally reliability, and popular sentiment in contested regions. But interpreting this information requires skills that no academic education could fully develop. The ability to distinguish between reliable sources and deliberate misinformation becomes crucial when strategic decisions depend on accurate understanding of rapidly changing political and military circumstances. The psychological pressure of representing divine authority while grappling with very human uncertainties about decision-making competence creates internal conflicts that have no easy resolution. Subjects expect their future king to project supernatural confidence and wisdom, while advisors demand honest assessment of limitations and willingness to accept guidance from experienced professionals who understand operational realities. Your correspondence with the rebellious lord requires careful crafting to communicate royal authority without closing off negotiation possibilities that might resolve the crisis without bloodshed, massive expense, or the precedent-setting implications that successful defiance might encourage among other potentially troublesome vassals throughout the kingdom. Every word must be weighed for immediate tactical impact and long-term strategic consequences. The castle's atmosphere grows increasingly tense as everyone recognizes that current events will determine not just immediate crisis outcomes, but the fundamental character of your eventual reign and the kingdom's trajectory for generations to come. Servants maintain professional efficiency, while obviously aware that their own futures depend entirely on royal family survival and continued political stability. Food preparation becomes subject to enhanced security measures as concerns about poisoning attempts create elaborate precautions that transform every meal into a reminder of the dangers accompanying royal blood during periods of political instability. Trusted tasters and careful ingredient sourcing provide practical protection, while symbolizing the isolation that separates rulers from the normal human experiences of their subjects. The approaching confrontation with rebellion forces you to grapple with the moral implications of using violence to maintain political authority, while recognizing that failure to respond decisively could result in far greater suffering through prolonged instability, civil war, and the collapse of legal systems that protect innocent subjects from arbitrary violence and exploitation. Your education's emphasis on justice, mercy, and noble conduct must be balanced against the harsh realities of power politics, where survival often requires actions that seem to contradict idealistic principles taught during peaceful times, when such contradictions remained merely theoretical rather than immediate practical dilemmas requiring concrete decisions with irreversible consequences. The transformation from protected prince to actual ruler accelerates dramatically as external events eliminate the luxury of gradual transition and demand immediate assumption of responsibilities that will define your character and determine the kingdom's fate through choices that cannot be delayed, delegated, or revised once their consequences begin rippling through the complex networks of cause and effect that govern political reality. As dawn approaches and council meetings resume with increased urgency, the weight of command settles upon shoulders that must now bear burdens no preparation could fully anticipate, while the crown that once seemed impossibly distant now awaits with all its terrible beauty and beautiful terror, ready to transform carefully educated potential into the harsh actualities of royal power exercised under conditions where failure means not just personal defeat, but the destruction of everything and everyone, depending on your wisdom, courage, and competence. The moment has arrived when theory yields to practice, when preparation meets its ultimate test, and when the protected world of royal education gives way forever to the unforgiving realities of actual rule, where every decision echoes through history and every choice carries the weight of countless lives hanging in the balance of royal judgment that cannot be postponed, avoided, or shared with anyone else in the entire kingdom. The rebellion's first skirmish reports arrive before breakfast, delivered by mud-splattered riders whose exhausted horses steam in the cold morning air. The engagement was minor, barely worth the name, but the symbolism cuts deep. Royal forces retreated after brief contact, not from cowardice, but from tactical caution that your enemies will undoubtedly interpret as weakness. The news spreads through the castle like wildfire, and you watch carefully as various faces reveal their owners' true thoughts about your family's continued grip on power. Your father remains confined to his chambers, though the fever has broken enough to allow brief conversations with his most trusted advisors. The improvement brings relief tinged with uncertainty, as his recovery timeline remains unclear, while immediate decisions cannot await his return to full capacity. Palace physicians speak in measured tones about rest and gradual restoration, but their eyes carry concerns they dare not voice regarding complications that could arise without warning. The morning's council session reveals fractures within your support network that peaceful times had kept hidden beneath courteous facades. Lord Aldrich suggests immediate negotiation with the rebels, his words carefully chosen but clearly motivated by estates that border the contested region. Count Baron advocates overwhelming force, though his enthusiasm might stem more from opportunities to settle old grudges than genuine strategic thinking. Lady Morwyn proposes diplomatic outreach to neighbouring kingdoms, but her family's recent marriage alliance raises questions about whose interests such overtures might ultimately serve. Each advisor's counsel carries merit alongside suspicious you to evaluate undertones that force not just their strategic recommendations, but their underlying motivations and potential conflicts of interest. The luxury of trusting completely in anyone's guidance evaporates as you recognise that even well-intentioned advice might serve agendas that don't align perfectly with royal interests or kingdom welfare broadly considered. Military intelligence updates paint increasingly complex pictures of enemy strength, territorial control, and popular support that resist simple categorization as either encouraging or alarming. The rebellion appears larger than initial reports suggested, but less organized than feared, with significant internal disagreements about objectives and tactics that might provide exploitation opportunities if approached skillfully. Yet these same divisions could make negotiations more difficult by eliminating clear leadership structures capable of making binding commitments. Supply chain assessments reveal vulnerabilities in royal logistics that peacetime abundance had obscured through comfortable assumptions about resource availability and transportation reliability. Winter conditions complicate movement of men and materials, while alternative routes through Allied territories require diplomatic agreements that might take precious time to negotiate and implement. The romantic image of royal armies marching proudly to battle gives way to mundane calculations about grain shipments, horseshoe inventory, and wagon wheel replacement schedules. Your personal correspondence grows exponentially as distant relatives, foreign dignitaries, and ambitious courtiers seek to position themselves advantageously during this period of uncertainty and opportunity. Each letter requires careful analysis for both explicit content and implicit assumptions about your political strength, decision-making competence, and likelihood of surviving current challenges with authority intact. Responses must project confidence while avoiding commitments that might prove impossible to honour if circumstances change unexpectedly. The Great Library becomes a refuge where historical precedents offer guidance about previous royal responses to similar challenges, though every parallel situation contained unique elements that limit the applicability of past solutions to current dilemmas. Chronicles of successful rebellion, suppression provide tactical insights alongside warnings about the long-term costs of purely military solutions that address immediate threats while creating lasting resentments among subject populations. Religious ceremonies take on heightened political significance as public appearances provide opportunities to demonstrate royal stability and divine favour while allowing assessment of popular sentiment through crowd reactions and attendance patterns. Your presence at morning prayers becomes a carefully choreographed performance where every gesture conveys messages about confidence, piety, and continuity that subjects interpret according to their own hopes and fears regarding kingdom stability. Economic pressures intensify as military preparations strain royal finances already stressed by recent infrastructure investments and diplomatic expenses that seemed prudent during peaceful periods, but now compete with immediate security requirements. Treasury officials present sobering projections about taxation capacity, borrowing possibilities, and trade disruption consequences that force recognition of warfare's enormous costs extending far beyond immediate battlefield expenses. Intelligence networks expand rapidly to provide more detailed information about enemy activities, ally reliability, and neutral parties who might be swayed toward either supporting or opposing royal authority, depending on how current events unfold. Managing these sources requires delicate balance between operational security and information sharing that ensures accurate assessment, while preventing leaks that might compromise strategic advantages. The castle's defensive preparations accelerate as engineers assess structural improvements needed to withstand potential siege operations, while garrison commanders evaluate personnel requirements and supply stockpiling necessary for extended resistance if external military support becomes unavailable. Familiar corridors transform into tactical considerations where every architectural feature must serve defensive purposes rather than comfort or aesthetic preferences. Marriage negotiations acquire sudden urgency as potential matches represent possible alliance opportunities that could provide crucial support during current instability, while establishing long-term partnerships for future challenges. Foreign princesses who seemed like distant theoretical possibilities now require immediate evaluation for diplomatic advantages their family connections might offer through military assistance, economic cooperation, or political legitimacy during contested succession periods. Your relationship with castle staff evolves as servants, guards, and minor officials begin treating you with deference reserved for actual authority rather than inherited potential. Conversations halt when you enter rooms, not from fear, but from recognition that your presence now carries weight independent of your father's reflected power. This change creates isolation as spontaneous interactions disappear behind formal protocols that emphasize rank differences. The rebellion's propaganda reaches the castle through various channels, revealing sophisticated arguments designed to undermine royal legitimacy by questioning your father's policies, your own competence, and the moral foundations of hereditary rule itself. Responding effectively requires understanding not just the explicit accusations, but the underlying grievances and popular sentiments that make such messages potentially persuasive among discontented subjects. Council meetings become intensive strategy sessions where theoretical knowledge must translate into practical policy decisions, affecting thousands of lives and enormous resource commitments that will influence kingdom stability regardless of immediate crisis outcomes. The gap between academic preparation and real leadership responsibility becomes painfully apparent as complex situations resist textbook solutions and demand wisdom that only experience can provide through trial and often error. Regional administrators send urgent reports about local conditions that might influence rebellion support, military recruitment potential, and popular sentiment regarding royal authority during periods of uncertainty. Their correspondence reveals how effectively central government policies have been implemented, while highlighting administrative weaknesses that ambitious enemies might exploit during extended conflicts or political transitions. Your personal security detail receives reinforcement as protection specialists express heightened concerns about assassination attempts during periods when eliminating potential successors might seem attractive to enemies seeking maximum chaos and confusion. The increased protection creates additional barriers between you and normal human interaction, intensifying isolation that accompanies growing political responsibility and decision-making authority. Sleep patterns deteriorate further as anxiety about impending decisions creates restlessness that resists comfortable bedchamber arrangements. Nights become periods for reviewing intelligence reports, analysing military options, and contemplating scenarios where wrong choices could result in defeat, exile, or death, not just personally, but for family members, loyal supporters, and innocent subjects whose welfare depends entirely on royal leadership competence. The psychological burden of representing divine authority while grappling with very human uncertainties about decision-making capabilities creates internal conflicts that have no easy resolution. Subjects expect their future king to project supernatural confidence and wisdom, while advisors demand honest assessment of limitations and willingness to accept guidance from experienced professionals who understand operational realities better than classroom theories. Diplomatic correspondence from neighbouring kingdoms requires responses that project strength without revealing weakness, demonstrate competence without appearing arrogant, and maintain alliance relationships while avoiding commitments that might limit future policy flexibility. Each letter represents a test of political sophistication where wrong responses could have consequences extending far beyond immediate crisis boundaries. The approaching military confrontation forces recognition that royal authority ultimately depends on willingness to use violence in defense of political legitimacy, regardless of personal moral preferences or idealistic principles taught during peaceful educational periods. The responsibility for ordering actions that will result in deaths weighs heavily on conscience trained to value justice and mercy above pragmatic calculations. Food preparation becomes subject to enhanced security measures as concerns about poisoning create elaborate precautions that transform every meal into reminders of dangers accompanying royal blood during politically unstable periods. Trusted tasters and careful ingredient sourcing provide practical protection while symbolizing the isolation separating rulers from normal human experiences shared by their subjects. Your correspondence with rebellious lords requires careful crafting to communicate royal authority without eliminating negotiation possibilities that might resolve crisis situations without bloodshed, massive expense, or precedent-setting implications that successful defiance might encourage among other potentially troublesome vassals throughout the kingdom. Every word must be weighed for immediate tactical impact and long-term strategic consequences. The castle's atmosphere grows increasingly tense as everyone recognizes that current events will determine not just immediate outcomes, but fundamental characteristics of your eventual reign and the kingdom's trajectory for generations. Servants maintain professional efficiency while obviously aware that their own futures depend entirely on royal family survival and continued political stability that ensures their employment and protection. Morning audiences with petitioners reveal how quickly news of royal challenges spreads among subject populations, creating opportunities for both demonstrations of loyalty and expressions of concern that require careful interpretation. Citizens who once approached with routine requests now seek reassurance about kingdom stability while offering support that might prove valuable during coming difficulties. Military exercises transition from training activities to operational preparations as theoretical scenarios become immediate possibilities, requiring concrete planning and resource allocation. Training grounds transform into staging areas where actual weapons replace practice equipment, and emergency drills prepare for genuine combat situations that could develop with minimal warning. The Great Hall's evening gatherings take on new intensity as nobles, merchants, and church officials seek opportunities to demonstrate loyalty while positioning themselves advantageously for whatever political changes might emerge from current crises. Conversations become intricate balancing acts where participants calculate how their long-term interests align with various possible outcomes while maintaining appropriate respect for existing authority structures. Intelligence reports provide increasingly detailed assessments about enemy activities, ally reliability, and popular sentiment in contested regions. But interpreting this information requires skills that academic education could never fully develop. The ability to distinguish between reliable sources and deliberate misinformation becomes crucial when strategic decisions depend on accurate understanding of rapidly changing circumstances. Your education's emphasis on justice, mercy, and noble conduct must be balanced against harsh political realities, where survival often requires actions that seem to contradict idealistic principles taught during peaceful times, when such contradictions remained theoretical rather than immediate practical dilemmas, requiring concrete decisions with irreversible consequences extending throughout the kingdom. The transformation from protected prince to actual ruler accelerates dramatically as external events eliminate gradual transition luxury and demand immediate assumption of responsibilities that will define character and determine kingdom fate through choices that cannot be delayed, delegated, or revised once their consequences begin affecting the complex networks of cause and effect governing political reality. Regional military commanders request immediate audiences to discuss deployment strategies, supply requirements, and coordination protocols that will determine campaign effectiveness while minimizing casualties among royal forces whose loyalty provides the foundation for all other political relationships. Their professional competence must be evaluated quickly while establishing command relationships that will function effectively under combat stress. Economic advisors present increasingly urgent analyses of resource constraints that limit military options while highlighting financial consequences of various strategic choices. The romantic notion of unlimited royal resources gives way to harsh arithmetic about competing priorities, where military expenditures must be balanced against other essential kingdom functions that maintain long-term stability and popular support. The rebellion's territorial gains, though modest, create symbolic victories that might encourage additional defections among wavering nobles who calculate their own interests based on perceptions of royal strength and determination. Each lost village or abandoned outpost becomes a political statement as well as tactical setback, requiring responses that address both military and propaganda dimensions of the growing conflict. Your father's health improves enough to allow brief consultations, but his continued weakness prevents resumption of full royal duties while creating delicate situations where authority must be shared without appearing divided or uncertain. These conversations provide valuable guidance while highlighting the loneliness of ultimate decision-making responsibility that cannot be fully shared even with trusted family members. As afternoon shadows lengthen across the castle courtyards and evening council sessions prepare to address increasingly urgent military and diplomatic challenges, the weight of impending command settles more heavily upon shoulders that must now bear burdens no preparation could fully anticipate, while the crown awaits with all its terrible responsibilities and magnificent opportunities ready to transform carefully educated potential into the unforgiving actualities of royal power exercised under conditions where every choice echoes through history. The evening's war council convenes in the chamber where maps sprawl across oak tables like wounded landscapes, their parchment surfaces marked with coloured pins that represent more than mere geography. Each marker signifies lives that will be risked, resources that will be consumed, and decisions that will ripple through generations of subjects who sleep tonight, unaware that their futures hang in the balance of discussions they'll never witness. Your military commanders present themselves with the weathered confidence of men who've survived campaigns where theoretical knowledge met brutal reality and emerged scarred but wiser. Their faces carry stories written in old wounds and careful eyes that evaluate not just your words, but the resolve behind them. They need to know whether you possess the iron necessary to order charges that will leave good men dead in muddy fields, or if hesitation will cost more lives than decisive action ever could. The maps reveal terrain that transforms from abstract geographical features into urgent tactical considerations. Rivers become barriers that armies must cross under enemy fire. Forests offer concealment for ambushes or protection for retreating forces. Hills provide defensive advantages or deadly exposure depending on who controls them first. Every contour line represents blood that might be spilled, every village a strategic prize that could determine campaign outcomes. Supply calculations dominate much of the discussion because armies move on their stomachs, and hungry soldiers become unreliable soldiers faster than inexperienced commanders realize. Grain stores, salt preservation, horseshoe inventory, and arrow production all require coordination across vast distances, where communication delays can turn minor shortages into catastrophic defeats. The romance of medieval warfare dissolves entirely when confronted with mundane logistics that determine whether campaigns succeed or collapse. Weather reports arrive from scouts who've ridden hard through conditions that will soon challenge every man in your potential army. Spring mud that turns roads into impassable quagmires, river crossings swollen by mountain snowmelt, and the approaching season when campaigning becomes feasible, but also desperately urgent before autumn closes the window for decisive action. Time becomes another enemy that must be conquered alongside human opponents. Intelligence assessments reveal the rebellion's internal structure in ways that suggest both opportunities and dangers. The enemy leadership includes competent military professionals alongside ambitious nobles whose personal grievances might override strategic thinking. This combination creates unpredictability where rational tactical responses might be undermined by emotional decision-making that escalates conflicts beyond anyone's original intentions. Your advisors present arguments with passionate conviction that barely conceals their underlying calculations about personal survival and advancement. Lord Marshal Garrett advocates immediate, overwhelming force, his scarred hands gesturing toward map positions with authority earned through decades of successful campaigns. Chancellor Aldwyn counsels diplomatic outreach, his scholarly demeanour masking political acumen that recognises military victories mean nothing if they bankrupt the kingdom or alienate crucial allies. Lady Helena, whose family connections span neighbouring kingdoms, suggests international mediation that might resolve the crisis without precedent-setting implications that encourage future rebellions. Her proposal carries merit alongside obvious benefits for relatives whose commercial interests would suffer during prolonged instability. Even trusted advisors serve multiple masters, and recognizing these competing loyalties becomes essential for evaluating counsel that might be excellent or catastrophic, depending on motivations you can only guess. The castle's evening atmosphere grows heavy with unspoken tensions as servants move through corridors with unusual quiet, their normal conversations replaced by whispered exchanges that cease when noble footsteps approach. Everyone understands that current decisions will reshape their world in ways that peaceful times never demanded. Cooks prepare meals with extra care, knowing that well-fed leaders make better choices. Stable hands tend horses with particular attention, recognizing that tomorrow might bring urgent departures. Your personal chambers offer no refuge from the weight of impending command, as even private moments become opportunities for reviewing intelligence reports, studying tactical manuals, and contemplating scenarios where wrong decisions result in consequences too terrible to fully imagine. Sleep remains elusive, as responsibility creates anxiety that comfortable bedding cannot soothe, while dreams, when they finally come, feature battlefields where faceless enemies threaten everything you've been taught to protect. Religious obligations take on new significance as morning prayers become moments of genuine supplication rather than ceremonial routine. The castle chaplain speaks of divine guidance with increased fervour, recognizing that spiritual counsel might prove as crucial as military strategy in determining outcomes that affect thousands of souls. Your relationship with God evolves from abstract theology into desperate need for wisdom that exceeds human capacity. Economic pressures intensify as Treasury officials present calculations that reveal the enormous costs associated with military mobilization. Professional soldiers require pay, equipment needs constant replacement, and supply chains demand protection that diverts resources from other essential kingdom functions. The gap between royal ambitions and financial reality creates constraints that force difficult choices between adequate preparation and fiscal responsibility. Regional reports arrive with disturbing frequency, detailing how news of rebellion spreads through subject populations and creates uncertainty that ambitious troublemakers might exploit. Merchants delay investments, farmers worry about harvest protection, and local administrators request additional guards for tax collection activities that become increasingly dangerous when royal authority appears questionable. Your correspondence with potential allies requires between requesting assistance, delicate balance, and maintaining dignity appropriate to royal status. Neighbouring kings evaluate your appeals through calculations about their own interests, regional balance of power, and opportunities that your difficulties might create for their own territorial ambitions. Friendship between crowns remains subordinate to practical considerations that make reliability a luxury rather than assumption. Marriage negotiations that seemed like distant future planning acquire immediate urgency, as diplomatic alliances represented by potential matches could provide crucial support during current instability. Foreign princesses who were merely names in genealogical studies now represent possible salvation through military assistance, economic cooperation, or political legitimacy that contested succession might require sooner than anyone anticipated. The rebellion's propaganda efforts reveal sophisticated understanding of popular grievances that royal isolation had prevented you from recognizing fully. Their messages resonate with subjects who feel overtaxed, underprotected, and ignored by distant rulers who seem disconnected from common struggles. Responding effectively requires addressing not just military threats, but underlying social problems that create fertile ground for continued opposition. Intelligence networks expand rapidly to provide detailed information about enemy activities, ally reliability, and neutral parties whose decisions might determine conflict outcomes. Managing these sources requires skills that academic education never covered, particularly the ability to evaluate human motivations under pressure and distinguish between reliable intelligence and deliberate misinformation designed to influence royal decision-making. Your relationship with castle staff evolves as recognition of your growing authority changes social dynamics in ways both subtle and profound. Conversations become more formal, requests transform into commands, and the comfortable familiarity of childhood gives way to respectful distance that emphasizes rank differences. Even long-time servants who've known you since birth begin treating you with deference reserved for actual rulers rather than potential ones. Military preparations accelerate as theoretical training gives way to operational planning for actual combat scenarios. Weapons maintenance, armor fitting, and cavalry exercises take on deadly seriousness when practice might soon become life or death reality. The romantic imagery of knightly combat dissolves when confronted with brutal practicalities of medieval warfare, where survival depends more on endurance and tactical thinking than individual heroism. Food security becomes a constant concern as extended military operations require supply lines that enemy forces might target for disruption. Granary inventories, preservation techniques, and alternative procurement sources all demand attention from administrators whose peacetime responsibilities never included logistics for potentially besieged populations. Hunger becomes a weapon that both sides might employ against civilian populations caught between competing authorities. The castle's defensive preparations reveal architectural features designed centuries earlier by ancestors who understood siege warfare intimately. Arrow slits, murder holes, and carefully angled walls all serve purposes that become immediately relevant when peaceful times end and ancient military wisdom proves its continued value. Your ancestral home transforms from comfortable residence into fortress that might need to protect royal blood against determined enemies. Evening audiences with petitioners reveal how quickly uncertainty spreads through subject populations and creates opportunities for both loyalty demonstrations and expressions of concern that require careful interpretation. Citizens approach with routine requests, but seek reassurance about kingdom stability while offering support that might prove valuable during coming difficulties. Reading popular sentiment becomes essential for maintaining the consent that underlies all political authority. Council meetings extend late into night hours as urgent decisions multiply faster than daylight hours allow for careful deliberation. Candlelight illuminates faces that show strain from constant pressure, while maps and documents accumulate evidence of challenges that require immediate attention despite incomplete information and conflicting advice from sources whose reliability remains questionable under crisis conditions. Your education in classical warfare must adapt quickly to contemporary realities, where siege engines, cavalry tactics, and infantry formations require modifications based on current enemy capabilities, available resources, and terrain advantages that theoretical studies never fully captured. Learning continues under pressure, where mistakes carry costs measured in human lives rather than academic grades. The psychological burden of commanding men who might die because of your orders creates internal conflicts that have no easy resolution. Moral principles about the sanctity of human life must be balanced against responsibilities for protecting larger populations whose welfare depends on successful defense of royal authority. Philosophy becomes practical when abstract ethical questions require immediate answers with permanent consequences. Regional military commanders request immediate deployment orders, while emphasizing resource limitations that constrain tactical options. Their professional competence must be evaluated quickly while establishing command relationships that function effectively under combat stress. Trust becomes essential, yet dangerous when survival depends on subordinates, whose loyalty might waver if royal authority appears weak or indecisive. Communication systems strain under increased message traffic, as coordinating widespread military and diplomatic activities requires information flows that peacetime infrastructure never needed to support. Messenger services, signal protocols, and document security all become crucial considerations when intelligence leaks might provide enemy forces with strategic advantages that determine campaign outcomes. The rebellion's territorial gains, though limited, create symbolic victories that influence popular perception more than their tactical significance might justify. Each abandoned outpost or lost village becomes propaganda that enemy forces exploit to demonstrate royal weakness, while encouraging additional defections among wavering nobles who calculate their interests based on apparent momentum shifts. Your father's gradual recovery allows increasingly frequent consultations, but his continued weakness prevents resumption of full royal duties, while creating situations where authority must be shared without appearing divided or uncertain. These conversations provide valuable guidance while highlighting the ultimate loneliness of decision-making responsibility that cannot be fully shared even with trusted family members who understand the burdens of royal blood. Economic advisors present urgent analyses of resource constraints that limit military options while highlighting financial consequences of various strategic choices. The romantic notion of unlimited royal resources confronts harsh arithmetic about competing priorities, where military expenditures must be balanced against other essential kingdom functions that maintain long-term stability and popular support necessary for any political authority. As midnight approaches and council sessions continue with increased intensity, the weight of command settles upon shoulders that must bear burdens no preparation could fully anticipate. Tomorrow will bring decisions that echo through history, while testing whether careful education has prepared you for responsibilities that transform theoretical knowledge into practical wisdom through trials that measure character under pressure no classroom could simulate. The crown awaits with all its terrible beauty and magnificent burden, ready to complete the transformation from protected prince to actual ruler, whose choices will determine not just personal fate, but the destiny of countless subjects who sleep tonight, trusting that royal wisdom will guide them through challenges they cannot imagine. The moment approaches when preparation meets its ultimate test and theory yields to the unforgiving realities of power exercised under conditions where failure means more than personal defeat. Dawn breaks grey and cold across battlements where sentries stamp their feet against stone that seems to absorb warmth and offer none in return. The rebellion has moved closer during the night, their campfires visible from the highest tower like fallen stars scattered across the valley floor. Smoke rises in thin columns that speak of organisation and confidence, suggesting enemy forces larger than initial reports indicated and better supplied than royal intelligence had hoped. Your morning begins before the sun clears the horizon, summoned by advisors whose faces carry the drawn exhaustion of men who've spent sleepless hours wrestling with problems that resist easy solutions. Maps spread across the council table show red markers that have crept steadily closer to the castle's outer defences, while supply reports reveal shortages developing faster than procurement's efforts can address them. The Great Hall buzzes with activity as nobles arrive for what everyone understands might be the final council before events move beyond the realm of discussion into the harsh territory of action. Lord Garrett's armour shows fresh oil and careful maintenance, while Chancellor Aldwyn's normally pristine robes bear ink stains from correspondence that continued through the night. Lady Helena enters with travel dust still clinging to her cloak, having returned from urgent diplomatic missions whose results remain hidden behind carefully neutral expressions. Intelligence reports pile higher on the council table like accusations against royal preparedness. Enemy forces include not just the original rebellious lord, but additional nobles whose participation transforms a local uprising into something approaching civil war. Mercenary companies have joined the rebellion, their professional competence adding military capability that feudal levies alone could never provide. Foreign observers hover at the rebellion's edges, their presence suggesting international interest in outcomes that extend beyond domestic concerns. Your father appears for the first time since his illness began, supported by attendants, but determined to project strength during these crucial hours. His presence brings both relief and additional pressure, as subjects throughout the castle recognise that royal authority remains intact, while expecting decisive leadership that illness has delayed but not eliminated. The symbolism of his appearance cannot be separated from its practical implications for military morale and political legitimacy. Military assessments reveal enemy positions chosen with professional skill that suggests experienced commanders rather than angry nobles acting from wounded pride alone. Siege equipment appears in their camps, indicating preparation for extended operations rather than quick raids designed to seize immediate advantages. The rebellion has evolved beyond spontaneous uprising into organised challenge to royal authority that requires equally professional response. Supply chain vulnerabilities become increasingly apparent as procurement officers report difficulties acquiring necessary materials through normal commercial channels. Merchants who once competed eagerly for royal contracts now demand advance payment or refuse orders entirely, their caution reflecting uncertainty about future political stability and payment guarantees. The economic foundation of royal power shows stress fractures that enemy intelligence might exploit. Regional administrators send increasingly urgent reports about local conditions that suggest popular support for rebellion might be growing beyond core territories, where original grievances provided initial motivation. Tax collection becomes dangerous as collectors face hostility that ranges from passive resistance to active violence. The kingdom's financial resources contract just when military expenses demand maximum funding. Religious ceremonies take on heightened political significance, as your presence at morning prayers demonstrates royal stability while allowing assessment of popular sentiment through attendance patterns and crowd reactions. The castle chaplain's homily emphasizes divine support for legitimate authority while carefully avoiding specific references to current challenges that might suggest weakness or desperation. Your personal correspondence grows exponentially as distant relatives, foreign dignitaries, and ambitious courtiers seek to position themselves advantageously during uncertainty that creates both dangers and opportunities. Each letter requires analysis for explicit content and implicit assumptions about your political strength, decision-making competence, and likelihood of surviving current challenges with authority intact. Marriage negotiations acquire desperate urgency as potential matches represent possible alliance opportunities that could provide crucial military support, economic assistance, or political legitimacy during contested periods when royal authority faces direct challenge. Foreign princesses who seemed like distant theoretical possibilities now require immediate evaluation for advantages their family connections might offer through diplomatic intervention or military assistance. The castle's defensive preparations accelerate as engineers assess structural improvements needed for extended siege operations, while commanders evaluate personnel garrison requirements and supply stockpiling necessary for resistance if external support becomes unavailable. Familiar architecture transforms into tactical considerations where every feature serves defensive purposes rather than comfort or aesthetic preferences. Economic pressures intensify as Treasury officials present sobering calculations about military costs, taxation capacity, and trade disruption consequences that force recognition of warfare's enormous expenses extending far beyond immediate battlefield requirements. Royal finances strain under demands that peacetime budgets never anticipated, while revenue sources contract due to instability that discourages commercial activity. Council debates become heated as advisors present conflicting recommendations based on different assessments of enemy strength, ally reliability, and popular sentiment that might influence conflict outcomes. Lord Garrett advocates immediate attack while enemy forces remain dispersed. Chancellor Aldwyn counsels negotiation before positions harden further, and Lady Helena suggests diplomatic outreach to neighbouring kingdoms whose intervention might resolve the crisis without precedent-setting military confrontation. Intelligence networks provide increasingly detailed but contradictory information about enemy activities, internal divisions, and potential vulnerabilities that might be exploited through careful tactical planning. Managing these sources requires skills that academic education never developed, particularly The ability to evaluate human motivations under stress and distinguish between reliable intelligence and deliberate misinformation designed to influence royal decision-making. Your relationship with military commanders evolves as they begin treating you less as the king's son and more as potential battlefield leader, whose orders they might need to follow under combat conditions, where hesitation or incompetence could result in defeat and death. Their professional evaluation of your capabilities becomes crucial for maintaining command authority that depends on respect rather than mere hereditary deference. Food security concerns escalate as extended military operations require supply lines that enemy forces might target for disruption, while besieged populations demand provisions that strain procurement capabilities. Granary inventories, preservation techniques, and alternative supply sources all require immediate attention from administrators whose peacetime responsibilities never included logistics for potentially isolated populations. The rebellion's propaganda efforts reveal sophisticated understanding of popular grievances that royal isolation had prevented full recognition of previously. Their messages resonate with subjects who feel overtaxed, underprotected, and ignored by rulers who seem disconnected from common struggles. Responding effectively requires addressing not just military threats, but underlying social problems that create fertile ground for continued opposition. Sleep becomes increasingly elusive as anxiety about impending decisions creates restlessness that comfortable chambers cannot soothe. Night hours transform into periods for reviewing intelligence reports, analysing tactical options, and contemplating scenarios where wrong choices result in consequences too terrible to fully contemplate. Dreams, when they come, feature battlefields where victory and defeat balance on edges sharp as sword blades. Physical security concerns escalate dramatically as your increased political importance makes you attractive targets for enemies seeking to destabilize the kingdom through elimination of royal succession. Bodyguards receive reinforcement, while protection protocols become elaborate procedures that transform every public appearance into carefully orchestrated security operations rather than spontaneous interactions with subjects. Morning audiences with petitioners reveal how quickly news spreads through subject populations and creates opportunities for both loyalty demonstrations and concern expressions that require careful interpretation. Citizens approach with their routine requests but seek reassurance about kingdom stability while offering support that might prove valuable during coming difficulties if properly organised and directed. Your education in classical military theory must adapt rapidly to contemporary realities where siege warfare, cavalry tactics, and infantry formations require modifications based on current enemy capabilities, available resources, and terrain advantages that theoretical studies never fully captured. Learning continues under pressure where mistakes carry costs measured in human lives rather than academic evaluation. The psychological burden of commanding men who might die because of your orders creates internal conflicts that resist easy resolution. Moral principles about human life's sanctity must balance against responsibilities for protecting larger populations whose welfare depends on successful defense of royal authority. Philosophy becomes intensely practical when abstract ethical questions demand immediate answers with permanent consequences. Regional military commanders request deployment orders while emphasizing resource limitations that constrain tactical options available for immediate implementation. Their professional competence requires quick evaluation while establishing command relationships that function effectively under combat stress, where trust becomes essential yet dangerous when survival depends on subordinates whose loyalty might waver if royal authority appears weak. Communication systems strain under increased message traffic as coordinating widespread military and diplomatic activities requires information flows that peacetime infrastructure was never designed to support adequately. Messenger services, signal protocols, and document security all become crucial considerations when intelligence leaks might provide enemy forces with strategic advantages that determine campaign outcomes. As the sun climbs higher and council sessions intensify with recognition that decisive action can no longer be delayed, the weight of impending command presses down with increasing force upon shoulders that must bear responsibilities no education could fully prepare anyone to handle. The moment rapidly approaches when theoretical knowledge must transform into practical wisdom through trials that will test character under conditions where failure means far more than personal disappointment. The crown awaits its full burden while enemies gather strength and time runs short for decisions that will echo through generations of subjects whose futures depend entirely on royal leadership competence, exercised under the most challenging conditions imaginable. Theory prepares to meet reality in confrontations where everything depends on choices that cannot be postponed, delegated, or revised once their consequences begin reshaping the kingdom's destiny through the unforgiving arithmetic of medieval power politics. The messenger's boots echo against stone as he strides into the council chamber, mud still clinging to his spurs and exhaustion etched across features that speak of hard riding through hostile territory. His news arrives like a blade thrust between ribs, sharp and immediate in its implications. The rebellion has secured additional support from Lord Dunstan's forces, bringing their total strength to nearly 3,000 men, while your own available forces number barely half that amount when accounting for garrison requirements and territorial defence obligations. Your advisors exchange glances that carry volumes of unspoken assessment, each face reflecting calculations about odds that grow less favourable with every passing hour. The comfortable assumptions of royal superiority begin crumbling under weight of harsh arithmetic that reduces noble bloodlines to mere numbers on tactical assessments where mathematics matters more than genealogy or divine right theories that seem increasingly abstract when confronted with enemy steel. The morning's intelligence briefing reveals enemy positions that demonstrate professional military planning rather than amateur rebellion driven by wounded noble pride alone. Their camps show organisation that suggests experienced commanders, their supply lines indicate preparation for extended operations, and their recruitment efforts appear to be succeeding among populations whose grievances provide fertile ground for continued opposition to royal authority. Your father's participation in council discussions becomes increasingly limited as physical weakness forces recognition that ultimate decision-making responsibility has shifted to shoulders that feel inadequately prepared despite years of careful education designed specifically for moments like these. The transition from theoretical preparation to practical command accelerates beyond anyone's preferred timeline, as external events eliminate luxury of gradual assumption of power. Regional reports arrive with disturbing frequency, detailing how news of successful rebellion spreads through subject populations and creates uncertainty that other ambitious troublemakers might exploit for their own purposes. Merchants delay investments, farmers worry about harvest protection, and local administrators request additional security for tax collection activities that become increasingly dangerous when royal authority appears questionable to common observation. Military commanders present themselves for consultation with expressions that blend professional respect with careful evaluation of your capabilities under conditions where theoretical knowledge must translate into practical leadership effectiveness. Their weathered faces carry stories of campaigns where mistakes resulted in casualties rather than academic corrections, and their assessment of your readiness becomes crucial for maintaining command authority during actual combat operations. Supply calculations dominate much discussion because armies require enormous resources that peaceful kingdoms rarely maintain in quantities sufficient for extended military operations. Grain stores, weapon maintenance, horse fodder, and medical supplies all demand coordination across distances where communication delays can transform minor shortages into catastrophic defeats that end campaigns before they properly begin. The castle's atmosphere grows increasingly tense as everyone recognizes that current events will determine not just immediate crisis outcomes, but fundamental characteristics of your eventual reign and the kingdom's trajectory for generations to come. Servants maintain professional efficiency, while obviously aware that their own futures depend entirely on royal family survival and continued political stability that ensures their employment and protection. Economic pressures multiply as Treasury officials present calculations revealing enormous costs associated with military mobilization that strain royal finances already stressed by recent infrastructure investments and diplomatic expenses that seemed prudent during peaceful periods, but now compete with immediate security requirements that cannot be delayed or reduced without accepting unacceptable risks. Your correspondence with potential allies requires delicate balance between requesting assistance and maintaining dignity appropriate to royal status, while recognizing that neighboring kingdoms evaluate appeals through calculations about their own interests, regional balance of power, and opportunities that your difficulties might create for their territorial ambitions or political advancement. Intelligence networks expand rapidly to provide detailed information about enemy activities, ally reliability, and neutral parties whose decisions might determine conflict outcomes. But managing these sources requires skills that academic education never covered, particularly abilities to evaluate human motivations under pressure and distinguish between reliable intelligence and deliberate misinformation designed to influence royal decision-making processes. The rebellion's territorial gains, though modest in absolute terms, create symbolic victories that influence popular perception more than their tactical significance might justify in purely military assessments. Each abandoned outpost or lost village becomes propaganda that enemy forces exploit to demonstrate royal weakness, while encouraging additional defections among wavering nobles who calculate their interests based on apparent momentum shifts. Religious obligations take on new significance as public appearances provide opportunities to demonstrate royal stability and divine favour, while allowing assessment of popular sentiment through crowd reactions and attendance patterns that reveal subject loyalties more accurately than formal declarations of support that political necessity might compel regardless of genuine feelings. Food preparation becomes subject to enhanced security measures as concerns about poisoning create elaborate precautions that transform every meal into reminders of dangers accompanying royal blood during politically unstable periods. Trusted tasters and careful ingredient sourcing provide practical protection, while symbolizing isolation that separates rulers from normal human experiences shared by their subjects. The Great Library offers temporary refuge where historical precedents provide guidance about previous royal responses to similar challenges, though every parallel situation contained unique elements that limit applicability of past solutions to current dilemmas. Chronicles of successful rebellion suppression provide tactical insights, alongside warnings about long-term costs of purely military solutions that address immediate threats while creating lasting resentments. Your personal chambers offer no escape from responsibility's weight, as even private moments become opportunities for reviewing intelligence reports, studying tactical manuals, and contemplating scenarios where wrong decisions result in consequences too terrible to fully imagine. Sleep remains elusive, as anxiety creates restlessness that comfortable bedding cannot soothe, while dreams feature battlefields where faceless enemies threaten everything you've been taught to protect. Marriage negotiations that seemed like distant future planning acquire immediate urgency, as diplomatic alliances represented by potential matches could provide crucial support during current instability while establishing long-term partnerships for future challenges that will define your reign's character and effectiveness. Foreign princesses who were merely names in genealogical studies now represent possible salvation through military assistance, economic cooperation, or political legitimacy. Physical training intensifies as the possibility of actual combat becomes increasingly likely rather than merely theoretical concern, addressed through academic exercise and ceremonial preparation. Weapons practice shifts from technique development to tactical scenarios that simulate battlefield conditions, where survival depends on skills that must function effectively under extreme stress and genuine mortal danger. The castle's defensive preparations reveal architectural features designed by ancestors who understood siege warfare intimately, their ancient wisdom becoming immediately relevant when peaceful times end and military considerations override comfort preferences. Arrow slits, reinforced gates, and carefully angled walls all serve purposes that transform familiar residence into fortress capable of protecting royal blood against determined enemies. Council meetings extend deep into night hours, as urgent decisions multiply faster than daylight allows for careful deliberation, while candlelight illuminates faces showing strain from constant pressure, and maps accumulate evidence of challenges requiring immediate attention, despite incomplete information and conflicting advice from sources whose reliability remains questionable under crisis conditions. Regional military commanders request immediate deployment orders while emphasizing resource limitations that constrain tactical options available for implementation. Their professional competence requiring quick evaluation while establishing command relationships that must function effectively under combat stress, where trust becomes essential yet dangerous when survival depends on subordinates whose loyalty might waver. Communication systems strain under increased message traffic as coordinating widespread military and diplomatic activities requires information flows that peacetime infrastructure was never designed to support adequately, making messenger services, signal protocols, and document security crucial considerations when intelligence leaks might provide enemy forces with strategic advantages determining campaign outcomes. The psychological burden of commanding men who might die because of your orders creates internal conflicts that resist easy resolution, forcing balance between moral principles about human life's sanctity and responsibilities for protecting larger populations whose welfare depends on successful defense of royal authority against enemies who show no similar scruples about civilian casualties. Your education in classical military theory must adapt rapidly to contemporary realities where siege warfare, cavalry tactics, and infantry formations require modifications based on current enemy capabilities, available resources, and terrain advantages that theoretical studies never fully captured in their abstract presentations of idealized combat scenarios. Weather reports from scouts emphasize seasonal factors that will influence campaign timing and tactical possibilities, with spring mud affecting troop movements, river levels determining crossing points, and approaching summer creating windows for decisive action before autumn closes, opportunities for extended military operations in territories where winter warfare becomes nearly impossible. The rebellion's propaganda efforts reveal sophisticated understanding of popular grievances that royal isolation had prevented full recognition of previously, their messages resonating with subjects who feel overtaxed, underprotected, and ignored by rulers who seem disconnected from common struggles that define daily existence for most kingdom inhabitants. Economic advisors present increasingly urgent analyses of resource constraints that limit military options while highlighting financial consequences of various strategic choices, forcing recognition that romantic notions of unlimited royal resources must confront harsh arithmetic about competing priorities where military expenditures balance against other essential kingdom functions, maintaining long-term stability. Your relationship with castle staff evolves as recognition of growing authority changes social dynamics in ways both subtle and profound, with conversations becoming more formal, requests transforming into commands, and comfortable familiarity giving way to respectful distance that emphasizes rank differences, even among people who've known you since childhood. Food security concerns escalate as extended military operations require supply lines that enemy forces might target for disruption, while besieged populations demand provision-straining procurement capabilities, making granary inventories, preservation techniques, and alternative supply sources immediate priorities for administrators whose peacetime responsibilities never included logistics for potentially isolated populations. The approaching military confrontation forces recognition that royal authority ultimately depends on willingness to use violence in defense of political legitimacy, regardless of personal moral preferences or idealistic principles taught during peaceful educational periods when such contradictions remained theoretical rather than immediate practical dilemmas requiring concrete decisions with permanent consequences. Intelligence reports provide increasingly detailed but sometimes contradictory assessments about enemy activities, internal divisions, and potential vulnerabilities that might be exploited through careful tactical planning. But interpreting this information requires judgment that academic preparation could never fully develop through classroom exercises that lacked genuine stakes. Your correspondence with the rebellious lords requires careful crafting to communicate royal authority without eliminating negotiation possibilities that might resolve crisis situations without bloodshed, massive expense, or precedent-setting implications that successful defiance might encourage among other potentially troublesome vassals throughout the kingdom, whose loyalty depends partly on perceptions of royal strength. Morning audiences with petitioners reveal how quickly uncertainty spreads through subject populations and creates opportunities for both loyalty demonstrations and concern expressions that require careful interpretation. As citizens approach with routine requests but seek reassurance about kingdom stability, while offering support that might prove valuable during coming difficulties if properly organised and directed toward useful purposes. Military exercises transition from training activities to operational preparations, as theoretical scenarios become immediate possibilities requiring concrete planning and resource allocation. With training grounds transform areas where actualing into staging weapons replace practice equipment, and emergency drills prepare for genuine combat situations that could develop with minimal warning. The Great Hall's evening gatherings take on new intensity as nobles, merchants, and church officials seek opportunities to demonstrate loyalty while positioning themselves advantageously for whatever political changes might emerge from current crises. Their conversations becoming intricate balancing acts where participants calculate how long-term interests align with various possible outcomes. As evening shadows lengthen across courtyards where guards pace with increased vigilance and the weight of impending decisions presses down with mounting force, the transformation from protected prince to actual ruler approaches its inevitable completion through trials that will test character under conditions no classroom could simulate. While the crown awaits with all its terrible responsibilities and magnificent burdens ready to complete the journey from theoretical preparation to practical authority exercised under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The rebellion draws closer with each passing hour, their campfires now visible from castle walls, like accusations against royal competence, while time runs short for decisions that will echo through generations of subjects whose futures depend entirely on wisdom gained through experience that cannot be postponed any longer, as theory prepares to meet reality in confrontations where everything depends on choices that transform careful education into the harsh actualities of medieval kingship. And so we reach the end of our journey through the marble halls and velvet chambers of medieval royalty, where we've discovered that being a prince wasn't the golden fairy tale most people imagine. From those first morning prayers that dragged you from sleep to the final war councils that stretched deep into restless nights, royal life was a careful balance between unimaginable privilege and crushing responsibility that would break most modern minds. We've walked through days structured by tutors and advisors who saw you not as a child, but as the future embodiment of divine authority, where every lesson carried the weight of thousands of lives, and every mistake could echo through generations. We've witnessed the isolation that comes with a crown that hasn't even touched your head yet, the loneliness of command that begins in childhood and only deepens with each passing year. The prince's world was one of constant performance, where genuine friendship remained nearly impossible and every relationship carried political implications. Whether learning to wield a sword that could someday defend a kingdom, or studying maps that represented the territories you might rule or lose, everything pointed toward that inevitable moment when preparation would meet the brutal realities of actual power. Perhaps most sobering of all, we've seen how quickly that moment could arrive, not with fanfare and ceremony, but with mud-splattered messengers bearing news of rebellion, forcing a young man barely out of adolescence to make decisions that would determine not just his own fate, but the destiny of everyone within his realm's borders. The fairy tale ends where real history begins, in council chambers lit by flickering candles, surrounded by advisors whose loyalty might waver and enemies whose steel remains sharp. The crown awaits, heavy with centuries of expectation, ready to transform a carefully educated boy into a king who must rule with wisdom no classroom could teach, and courage no training ground could fully prepare. And with that sobering thought, perhaps it's time to appreciate our own quiet nights, where the only rebellions we face are alarm clocks, and the only crown we wear is the one we choose for ourselves.